you folks tonight? Good? Good. Hello, my name is John Andrew Kramer, and welcome to my home. Now, most everything you see here, the windows, the doors, the banisters, and the trim, are all the fruits of my family's lumber business. That's right, Kramer Brothers led the lumber industry in Elizabeth City for exactly 90 years. Now, my father started the company in 1871, as he dubbed it D.S. Kramer. Now, in its time, it went through 5 name changes before it was liquidated in 1961 as Kramer Brothers Company. Some of you here tonight may remember it. Now, my father, Daniel Kramer, moved his family here from Watsontown, Pennsylvania in 1870. Now, I know what some of you must be thinking. That was right after the war. I have learned from living here in Elizabeth City that when a Southerner speaks of the war, he is not speaking of the French and Indian War or the Mexican War or of any other war except, in fact, for the war between the states. So when we first arrived here, we were probably labeled carpetbaggers. But when the citizens of Elizabeth City saw how the Kramer Mills employed workers and gave them a good budget, and most importantly, helped rebuild the economy, they began to think a little bit differently. Now, my father, being the father of 6 children, was absolutely appalled at the inadequate post-war schools in Elizabeth City. So what did he do? He took himself back up north in 1878, and he returned with a supremely gifted school teacher, none other than Samuel L. Sheep. Now, Mr. Sheep started a city-run school and was its superintendent until the time of his death in 1928. It's Sheep Harney Elementary School that bears his name today. Now, the coming of the railroads in the 1880s was a boon to the lumber industry. I can remember in 1883, the Independent blared, "There are more buildings and construction in Betsytown than was ever known at one time." In 1887, D.S. Kramer became D.S. Kramer and Sons. That's right, I joined with my father and my 3 brothers, Edmund, Joe, and Alan, 2 of whom may sound familiar to some of you. Now, my brother Joe, he was the father of Joe Kramer, Jr., who began the Rose Buddies back in the 1970s with Fred Fearing. And Joe Jr., he died in 1987, but his legacy lives on in the roses that still bloom at the waterfront today. And my brother Alan, good old Alan, he opened a motion picture house. But I have heard that if you go there on gloomy Friday nights, you can see my brother Alan's ghost still watching his movies. Now, I know for a fact that that is untrue. No, Alan enjoyed his movies far too much for that. He's there nightly. Now, by 1891, we had become Kramer Brothers Company. We had a planing mill at Poindexter Hill and a sawmill at Dry Point, which is now Riverside Avenue. Now, it should come as no surprise to any of you here tonight that Elizabeth Street used to be a creek. Yes, it was called Poindexter Creek. Now, anybody who has witnessed a good rainstorm or Hurricane Isabel in this town can visualize this quite easily. Now, we had a very, very good method of obtaining our lumber. What we did was we had it brought upriver and then floated up creek to Poindexter Hill. Now, as good as this method was, there was one major flaw in the 2 mills, and I will have you know that it was not with their construction. No, the flaw was the distance between the mills. But we fixed the problem. What we did was we installed the first telephone line in the area. It was a private line connecting the 2 mills. Now, back then, it was quite unheard of to have a telephone. It was even considered odd. I can remember this one time. There was nobody at all in the office but a simple mill worker. The telephone rang, scaring that poor man half to death. Well, he didn't know what to do, so naturally he did nothing. And naturally the phone continued to ring. Well, when the poor soul's nerves could no longer tolerate the incessant ringing of the telephone, he ran to the phone, ripped the receiver off the hook, and screamed into it, "Ain't nobody here!" Then slammed it back down. So much for progress, right? Now, another oddity of the time was the duo known as the Wright brothers. I can remember one day in 1900, they came into the mill wanting to buy lumber. When we asked them what they wanted the lumber for, they told us they were going to build a flying machine. Well, Edmund sold them what they wanted, and as they left, he shook his head. To the day my brother died, he always did marvel at how those two didn't look like they were off their rockers. But as it turned out, the Wrights had a fairly long association with Kramer brothers. It was Kramer Lumber that built their first camp and hangar in 1902. And in 1908, on Wilbur's last visit to Elizabeth City, he wrote in his diary, "Bought lumber of Kramer's, $91.90. Guess they were more serious about that flying machine than we were. Now, none of the Kramers lived to a very good age. In fact, none of us saw his 58th birthday. As for me, my time came at the Elizabeth City Courthouse. I was there, testifying for my company in a lawsuit. Now, I knew my heart was bad, and I really did dread climbing those stairs to the second floor courtroom, but it was unavoidable. As I was testifying, I fell to the floor dead from a massive heart attack. That was September 27th, 1916. Later generations of Kramers kept the company going. It suffered quite a bit during the Great Depression, but it stayed alive. By the 1950s, most of the area's bountiful forests had been cut. And in 1961, the final year, Kramer Brothers and Company was sold to L.R. Foreman and Sons, thus erasing the name of Kramer from the lumber business forever. But, you know, it's not so bad. Oh, I dropped my cigar. Actually, I consider 90 years a pretty good run. I mean, we even left a building on Main Street as a memorial. Not so bad for a family of carpetbaggers. Well, I'm sure you folks have other places to go and other people to see, so I'm going to let you go. But before I do, I have just one more thing to say, and that is any of you ever feel adventurous? My brother Alan always welcomes visitors to watch his movies with him. It's been a lovely time having you visit with me tonight. Good evening.